Welcome everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Even while you're eating pizza? Yes. Well, my name is Mohamed Abousalem. I have the privilege of serving as president of Tech Graduate Institute, and what a privilege it is, especially on these days like today, where I get to practice with our campus community one of our core values, which is leadership. I'm really excited about today's panel, and thanks to our guests who I will introduce in a minute. But it's really, as you know, important for us to train our students on leadership, develop, and grow the leadership skills, but also for us as faculty and staff to practice leadership and enhance it in everything we do every day. So this is an opportunity for us to learn from industry, professionals who can talk to us about their journeys and answer specific questions that we have. And I'd like to thank everyone who registered, and thank you for the questions that you put in. And we are going to ask those questions along the way. So I want to welcome our panelists, and I'm going to introduce them. So we will start in order of seating here. Dr. Stephen McCormick is Chief Scientific Officer at Shamit Life Sciences, where he leads the strategic visioning and implementation of innovative pharmaceutical manufacturing and biopharmaceutical development. Stephen is also the Managing General Partner at Excella LLC, where he focuses on developing groundbreaking medical solutions and fostering strategic investments to shape the future of healthcare. Leveraging his 25 years of experience in pharmaceutical manufacturing, construction management, and executive leadership, Stephen helps drive the integration of artificial intelligence into discovery and production platforms to enhance medical self-reliance and address systemic healthcare challenges. Stephen has a BA in biology from Holy Cross College and a PhD in biomolecular science and engineering from UC Santa Barbara. Please join me in welcoming Steve. I'm also honored to welcome Marissa Coe, who is President, Strategic Advisor, and Principal of Innovation Edge LLC, a small boutique consulting firm helping small AI and technology firms partner with large life science companies. Marissa is the former head of real-world data analytics, innovation, and partnership team at Bristol Myers Squibb, where she was responsible for effectively leveraging RWD assets across commercial and R&D functions. Prior to BMS, Marissa was CEO of National Research Institute, NRI, a clinical research site providing clinical trial services to the pharmaceutical industry. Marissa holds an MBA from the Anderson School of Management at UCLA, a pharmacy degree from University of Pharmacy in Buenos Aires, a master's in media and communications psychology from Touro University Worldwide, and a master's in sports leadership from Rider University. Marissa is also an incoming member of KGI Board of Trustees. Please welcome Marissa. And last but definitely not least, Mark Dole, who is Vice President and General Manager of Amgen's Biosimilars business, where he leads strategy, pipeline, and commercial portfolio. Over his 20 years at Amgen, Mark held multiple leadership roles across commercial operations, process development, and other corporate functions. Mark began his career as a research scientist at Harvard Medical School and worked in product development for startup biotech companies. Mark holds a chemistry degree from Holy Cross College and proudly a master's in business and bioscience from the inaugural MBS class of KGI. That's what Well, thank you very much, our guests today, and I'd like for us to start by asking each of you to share with us your professional journey and your leadership experiences just in a few minutes so we get to know who you are and the context that you're coming from so our audience can think about the questions they can ask and also engage with you. So who would like to start to share a summary of their experience? first.
Ladies first.
Okay.
I am, Marisa, I love that you all are here today because most of the things that I'm going to say about my career will probably resonate with you guys. I'm a PharmD by training and stumbled into being a PharmD by one of my chemistry professors, organic chemistry professors in high school, who actually saw that I was passionate about OChem. What I like about this audience is they will not cringe when I say that. And so I ditched the idea of being in med school, went to pharmacy school, loved every minute of it, but realized one thing: retail pharmacy was not for me. And so I went to friends of mine who were in the industry, and I said, I just want to be the first female general manager of a pharmaceutical company in Argentina. What do I do? And after he laughed and said, well, here's the thing. You will never be a general manager if you don't come from commercial. If you want to be in commercial, you have to carry the bag. If you want to really be a good salesperson, a stint in regulatory will not, be bad, because if you can convince a regulator, you can convince a physician. But getting to the pharmaceutical industry in any way, shape, or form, except QA, QC, because you will get stuck. So, but one of the things that he said actually stuck with me, which is if you want to be a great leader, you have to learn a lot about the functions that you will manage. You don't have to be an expert, but you have to build trust, and you have to, convey that you understand what they do for a living. So that's my career in a nutshell. I went through regulatory and sales, marketing, et cetera, et cetera. Came to the U.S., got my MBA, worked for finance, worked for Amgen in finance and a whole host of other departments. Left corporate and I'm passionate about clinical research, led a clinical research site where I really knew how we do clinical research and what sponsors do to the poor sites. And then I came back into industry because I'm a passion for innovation and digital. So difficult things, very tough problems, almost unsolvable problems happen in large corporations. In small corporations, we have problems that feel really tough, like, am I going to be able to make payroll? But it's not really unsolvable. So I've been with BMS almost 12 years, and very recently retired, and I'm having fun advising companies.
Great, thank you, Marisa.
You want to go for it?
Sure?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
We go by age, youngest first.
First of all, Mohamed, thanks for inviting me back here to KGI. It's always good to come back home. And I must admit, it's a bit of a surreal moment here, being in this seat and not being in those seats as I was 25 years ago, so bear with me here. I started, as Mohamed said, I went to Holy Cross and I got a chemistry degree and spent a lot of time also with biology. And the thing at the time was I wanted to go to medical school. And those of you that are or have been interested in medicine realize it's definitely a long journey. It's something that you need to be committed to. And as my 4 years in college went along, my commitment started to perhaps be questioned or waned a little bit. And so rather than jumping straight into medical school, I decided, hey, I'll go do research in a hospital medical school setting so I can sort of see what life is like. And after 1 year, in the lab, working with a surgeon at the medical school, got to see a bit more of, what life would be like. And my commitment started to, continue to go down. And then 1 year turned into 2 years, and then at the end of my second year, a professor at Holy Cross reached out and said, hey, there's a guy, Stephen McCormick, who's actually going to be back at the school to talk about this new program that they're starting out in California, and you may be interested in it. And it's this new school where it's the convergence of science and business, and it's meant to cater to leaders in this future biotech industry that's like just getting going. And this is in the late 90s in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So on a whim, drove out to Worcester, Massachusetts, and actually met with Stephen. And spoiler alert, I decided to come to KGI, based on his great sales pitch about this new institution that they were starting out here in Claremont. And I must say it was terrific decision, and I'm glad Stephen chose that day to head out there, and I chose that day to connect in with him to hear about KGI. After my 2 years, and we can talk a bit more about what the school was like back then, but after my 2 years, in between my first and second year, I actually did an internship, Stephen will cover this a bit as well, at a company called Alacure that was getting started out in the valley. Came back to KGI for my second year, and then upon graduation went to go work at Amgen. I only stayed at Amgen for about a year, and I left. One of my professors from KGI had a friend who was starting a company in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and he had said, hey, you may be interested in learning a bit more about this company. So decided to take a job out there. We were 20-ish people when it started. I stayed there for 3-4 years and did a whole bunch of different things in drug development, business development, all sorts of things. And after the 4 years, as the company grew, I was at sort of a pivotal point of, did I want to jump to another startup company like a lot of my friends were that I had joined this company with, or head back to a company like Amgen to learn a bit more about drug development, which is something that I was very interested in doing. And so at that point, about 20 years ago, decided to head back to Amgen, and the plan at the time was to stay for 3, 4, maybe 5 years and learn a bit more about drug development, and then jump back to another small, mid-sized type of company. And what I would say is, I've been at Amgen now almost 20 years, and similar to what Marissa was saying, the company definitely pushes its employees to explore other areas. And so over my 20 years, as Mohamed said, I've been in supply chain, process development, in commercial a couple times. I've led our bone health franchise, worked in technology and digital strategy, and then most recently, about 1.5 years ago, moved back into commercial to head up our biosimilar business unit. And what I would say is, as you're looking for your careers and what you want to do, definitely look for a company that has that culture that invests in you, in your growth, in your personal fulfillment. Because you have, whether you think so or not, you have so many options right in front of you, and what you want to make sure is that you take advantage of this opportunity to match your aspirations, your growth, your culture, your beliefs with where you want to go. So, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Mark. Stephen.
Stephen McCormick, wonderful to be here today. Yeah, and it is a trip down this memory lane, and to help you guys with a little bit of perspective on where things were. I was a bio-pre-med at Holy Cross, and I actually found a laboratory at UMass Medical Center. I worked for the director of molecular medicine, and this was when Genentech was just a tiny company, and there was Genetics Institute. There was several other companies that had gotten underway, and it was really at the very beginning of the forefront of this revolution, right? And I just absolutely fell in love with the laboratory. I was always a science guy, that was always my direction and my passion. After a brief stint at Rockefeller in Manhattan, I applied to school out here. I went to UC Santa Barbara, and it was an interdepartmental program, but they really didn't know the way technology has evolved from that time in 1988. Because we had chemistry and material science and biological sciences and all these other things. Is they gave you a sort of a spattering of classes everywhere, and you could kind of rotate and pick whatever laboratory you wanted to land in. I worked for the chairman. I actually jumped into a laboratory right away, and it was was absolutely wonderful, wonderful experience. And moving about into, and it was very productive, and I really enjoyed the bench research, but I wanted to have a broader impact on things. So as I was progressing through my PhD program, and I had this guy Bob Sensheimer as an advisor, and Bob was the chair at Caltech when all this FIX 174 and all this strange stuff was discovered, and he was at the chancellor at UC Santa Cruz, and he had like a very different perspective. He was in Congress testifying, and I thought, okay, I want to study the legal, social, and ethical implications of all these things, right? In addition to this, because one of the pivotal things for me was when I was a graduate student, and I gave the Interference Society, I gave one of these esteemed presentations, like 700 or 800 people, right? And it blew my mind, but what I also recognized was I was the expert that 20 people in the globe knew, at that level of detail of where things were, and I called myself my own master of my own microcosm, right? Because it was so like little, in that element. So kind of fast forward to where things were, I ended up going to Georgetown. I had a great post, which I had a really well-funded, great postdoc with 2 medical students and 2 technicians, and I was a senior fellow at a think tank called the Kennedy Institute, which did a lot of work on these policy issues, right? And I did a lot of things with the National Academy of Sciences and everything else in that regard. And then when KGI was just founded, this guy who was the chief scientist here, Dave Gallus, they just post, and this is when people flip through Science magazine and look in the back, and there's actual postings, right? And there's like, and I came on as the director of science and technology development tank, and like incredibly wonderful time right at the founding, right? And this was 3 years before we had even gotten this building, and before there was a program and any credentialing, and the whole curriculum had to get put together and all these things. And I had this, as a young guy in my 30s, and I had this board of corporate leaders. So I had, Amgen, Allergan, Baxter, Bayer, Minimed, Medtronic, Monsanto, DuPont, senior VP or VP level, and I was overseeing this board, right? And that was when Al Mann, who had Minimed as a company, an icon in the industry, said, "Listen, Steve, I'm starting this company with a Nobel laureate in Switzerland. His name is Rolf Sinkernagel, and I'd like you to go take a look at it. I'll give you 6 months." I said, "Well, I'd like to start a company, and if it doesn't work out for you, no harm, no foul. You're done, basically kind of like type of thing." I'm like, wow, okay. That's a little tight timeline. And so I joined on with Al very early on this prospect, and started. It was an exciting time when Mark joined on, and I was trying to think about whether we had like the first 13 people that I had hired on, and what became eventually Mankind Corporation, the Inhaled Insulin program, and we had raised first 15 million, then 50 million, then 125 million, then 240 million with UBS, and then the IPO we raised 440 million, extraordinarily well capitalized, right? There's a lot of things that went on. September 11th took place. We had to rescale and change things, and eventually that company grew and became what it is today. And then I moved over to the advanced bionic side of things, and then that was sold it was I think in total, with the earnout was like 1.8 billion, and then I was like, okay, what next? And I became a venture capitalist. I moved the entire family to Switzerland and was there for several years. Really exciting time. And I came back here and have been involved in numbers of different companies. So I'm kind of like always between the capital and the capital markets and the innovation, right? And I find my sweet spot being kind of right in that regard. Excella is what I've been, so that thing that we heard about is sort of my own little private investment fund, right? So I've invested, you can spend a lot of money on early stage companies, right? Usually, seed and all the way through in biotech, you're looking at easily $5 to $10 million just to get a proof of concept type of thing, underway. And there's not a lot of attraction in that in the market, or traction, because of the changes that have taken place, as of the past past year only. But even the past couple of years. So what I'm involved in right now is a company called Shemik Life Sciences. It's a funded endeavor. So the capital sources that you work with can be very different. They could be the banks, they could be institutional capital, or they could be family office capital and those types of things. So we have design plans to build a high-throughput manufacturing facility in Detroit. It's about a $500 million facility all in to build the facility, independent of all the development dollars that have to go in, but that's kind of like the cap and some of the capital expenses associated with that, and then other places. And where we are today in this world is a lot of shifts in the market. There's shifts in interest. We were just talking about global supply chain. We were talking about the biosimilars and the generics market and where things are going and how one adapts throughout. So that's kind of enough for a summary from me, I think.
Thank you, Stephen. And what I find fascinating in the three journeys we heard about is the variety of activity, and certainly none of you had a linear path, in your career. So I want to maybe, Mark, if we just focus on that. I mean, you mentioned the opportunity with a company like Amgen that is promoting that variety and learning, and also, hearing about your journey even before Amgen. What do you think motivates you to keep growing as a leader and going through that variety of experiences to continue growing?
Yeah, I think, Mohamed, if we're to take a step back and look where we are in time and history, there's no better industry, there's no better ecosystem to be a part of than the bioscience and technology and innovation industry right now. I think we all can realize that the rapid pace of change, but with that change comes a huge opportunity. And not just an opportunity to advance technology, but an opportunity to advance innovation and technology to benefit human life around the world. And try not to be hyperbolic, but the advances that we've made as a society and as this healthcare ecosystem, the immense potential that we have over the next couple of years and decades is just enormous. And then so you sort of like scale it back, like, all right, so what can we do? What can I do? And it does come back to leadership. And as I'm thinking back in sort of my career journey and my journey at KGI, and I saw Bob Curry walk in here as well, I'm thinking back to the entrepreneurship class that we had in our second year at KGI, where Bob, David Gallus, Hank Riggs taught a bioscience entrepreneurship class. And all right, I was 20-something at the time, and I totally took it for granted. But they would bring in like David Baltimore to teach about a certain subject. Lee Hood was there the next week to talk for a couple hours on another topic. But what they stressed was leadership and investing in people. And I still remember Bob saying, like, you can have like the greatest idea, if you don't have good people, it's going to be worthless. Give me the best team and the best people, and they can turn anything. Or if they don't, they'll find another good idea. And it comes back to that leadership and what is KGI responsible for. And it's for educating leaders for this next generation of our industry. And bringing it back to your question to me, we all know that things are going to continually evolve, constantly moving. That's part of the excitement of why we're all in this area. And the biggest impact we can have is getting groups of people together, getting teams together to focus on the gnarliest problems that are out there. And when you converge science, healthcare, economics, and how people pay for healthcare and interventions and drugs, those are some of the world's most challenging problems. I have friends that are in engineering and they work at like SpaceX or General Electric, and they're engineering problems. I don't mean to minimize it, but when you're talking about engineering problems, enough time, enough money, you can solve them with math, to get a rocket from point A to point B. When you're talking about science and the human biology and physiology, it's exponentially much more complicated. And so you need to be able to bring the greatest minds together to solve and to tackle these problems. And if you don't have leaders who respect and bring the right people together, you're not going to end up with the best teams. You're not going to end up with the best solutions. And so it truly is a journey of constantly being able to learn, grow, make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and being able to bring those teams together. So that's where, to your question, Mohamed, it's leadership, it's multifactorial, but it starts, and ends with people.
Thank you for that, and I like the fact that, if you take a sort of a thread in what you said, it's really following your passion too, which brings you to the point of the right people, and I always say it all starts with the people.
Yeah.
And the right people meaning, the right people for that context. And to be great in that context, you have to have that passion for it, and ability and aptitude for that context. So maybe that takes me to a question to Marissa. So being a great leader in STEM, what do you think defines that?
I don't think the characteristics of leadership in STEM have changed that much over the years, except they're heightened now more and more. But I would say, and I concur with Mark, first and foremost, being curious instead of trying to know everything. So one of the things that I would agree with you, following the passion is important. Chances are you guys have no idea what your passion is. Let's face it, many of you, I should say. I had no idea that clinical was my passion until I just happened to have a job at Amgen that was the head of finance for clinical research, and I went to the head of clinical research and I said, Sally, I have no idea what you do for a living, but I love to learn. And I think that's really when they put me in 26 different work streams, aside from my job. That's when you learn, and that's where you go, keeping that curiosity, keeping that humility that says, I don't know, but I want to learn, because knowing a lot about how the system works, especially in an industry like ours that is so complex and is so fragmented, if you wish, the more you know, chances are the higher the trust, and the more informed decisions you can make, and the more riches you can build. This is the master industry of, can you connect the dots and build bridges across functions? So that's would be one. The second one is trying to say you guys are used to complexity. Dealing with complex things are in your DNA. Can you translate that into direction? I used to tell most of my direct reports that were scientists, it's like, I don't need a 15,000-page dissertation. I need 3 bullet points that says, why should I care about what you're saying? Right? And that is, as a former scientist, that was one of the toughest things for me to learn, especially when you have, in my 5 years pharmacy degree, the only business class we ever had was the history of pharmacy. That was it. So most of the business I had to learn it outside. And going into detail after detail after detail, no. That's not the way that's the way you communicate with other scientists, that's not the way you communicate in the business world. So I think that might be another one. The second one is psychological safety. Especially when we're dealing with science and models and so on and so forth, our ability to say, just put your neck out and say, I disagree with the output. That's not something that we know in academia, where it's referential, and of course, the big honcho will know better than anybody else. That doesn't happen anymore. It shouldn't happen anymore. Now the one that is incredibly heightened is the ethical component. You're dealing with a lot of data, a lot of information, and the pressure of understanding compliance and ethics, and when you have to push back. That's not something that they teach us in school, by the way. It's like, go out and do it. And you have to have the courage, right? To understand when you need to push back and do it. I remember a story when I was at Amgen, and one day I asked our former CEO something in the middle of the, those big rooms and so on and so forth. And as I was walking back to my office, I see my boss calling, and he goes, "What did you tell Kevin? What did you ask Kevin?" And I go, if I can't ask my CEO a question that I'm genuinely interested in, then this is not a company that I need to work for. And so have that criteria in your mind as to what's important and how you want to build your name, your reputation.
Thank you for that. I want to build on a couple of things. You talk about continuous learning, because you talked about how the field is evolving, like the growth in the amount of data, type of data, as one example, and the continuous learning. So that, I'd like to pivot from that to your experience, Stephen. You've been doing so many varied, functions and activities in different areas, and I'm sure innovation, is a big component of what you're doing every day. What advice that you would give to our students on what kind of skill sets they need to develop so they can continuously adapt to this evolving, biopharmaceutical ecosystem, knowing that innovation is a big component of that?
Absolutely. I'm still learning every day. Hard to believe, but there's just a huge amount, and I think that's the wonderful thing that we get to do today, is to continue to learn and to grow as individuals. And early on, I thought that the most important element was really that technical understanding, and that being that smartest technical person, right, kind of within the room or within that problem-solving element, because that was a very important component of the nature of the, from which I had sprung. That ends up being a very, very small component of things right now. And in terms of the positions and the things that I do, and the people who grant me a lot of authority to make decisions, is really the exercising of good judgment. Which is what an important thing, that I learned over that period of time. And Marisa touched upon some really critical points about the team and how as a leader, one builds a cross-functional team with different backgrounds and different upbringings and different understandings and different perspectives, and how you can speak freely without reprisal, right, amongst that group as a leader amongst that group, is how that's coordinated and how people can bring those things together. And it goes back to those times when I remember with Mark, where I had a team, and I was very blessed and fortunate, because I played sports, and that was a really big component to me about how to fit into a team and all those other things. And when my team was like adamant about one particular point, and I was, I would say, well, let me sleep on it, because I'm a slow thinker. There's a lot of times to come back, to say, okay, I understand all of your perspectives. I hear everyone, no sidebars, nobody, sort of gets preference in that. And the reason being, what happens now is we're dealing with systems level problem solving, right? This isn't like a single little nuanced type of thing that needs to be. It's a multifactorial thing, which is an element to how that is. How does AI fit into? And I know we're going to talk about that, but that's only just one component, right? Because whatever questions you feed into it, and whatever agent you build, and exactly what the source of the data that's coming into that is going to inform what the answers are that come out. But ultimately, going back to answer the question about the skills, it ended up that the technical element ended up being down at the bottom. Good judgment ended up being the top, and what's important really is communication, articulation, all these things. And I didn't learn, from a science guy, I had to learn how to write, I had to learn how to speak, I had to learn how to communicate. And fortunately, I was able to pick up some of those things, I think, along the way, because they were absolutely critical, in what I do today, right? And all I do is end up writing and communicating, working with teams.
This is great advice, and we could actually use the summary of this conversation thus far to, when we talk to prospective students who are considering, this ecosystem, and say, these are the kinds of things you do, these are the kinds of opportunities, And these are the kinds of skills you need to develop. But it almost feels like everything is hunky-dory, great, everything works, it's just a matter of you doing it. But of course, reality is not like that, especially if you are a leader. So Mark, I'll go back to you, and I'm sure you've had challenges along the way as a leader in the different roles that you have taken on. Can you share with us, how do you typically approach those challenges to address them and solve them?
Yeah, absolutely, Mohammed. And maybe to build upon what we were talking about earlier, it comes back to the people, and that part of the team and leadership is when it's working well and you have clear line of sight to what the problem is, things are fantastic. But then also the flip side of that coin is you're dealing with people. And humans are complicated beings. We all have different, feelings, emotions, beliefs. That's what makes us all interesting and helps to bring out the best in our problem solving. But when you have a convergence of, let's say, science and people's beliefs, oftentimes you can end up butting heads. And so, there's many times throughout my career where we're trying to solve a very challenging problem. And let's say you're getting a scientific result or a business result that's a bit ambiguous. And then you're bringing the team together and asking for people's opinions. Well, what do you think? How would you help solve this problem? How can we do better? And if you ask, say, 10 people, you may get 10 different opinions. And so then what do? Does everybody get frustrated and then run out of the room and then things compound? So what I've tried to do is bring the team together and have that open dialogue. And I think Marissa used the word psychological safety, and that's one area where if you're a leader that provides and allows for that psychological safety, people feel comfortable voicing their opinion. And they feel comfortable voicing their opinion even if it's not the predominant opinion in the room. And that's where if you have that psychological safety, people can bring what's on their mind, their interpretation, and then have that conversation. And oftentimes what we find is as you talk through it and really listening to other people's perspective, you can find a good path forward. Does that mean all 10 people are going to all agree all the time? No, of course not. But I think then people respect each other and know that they're coming at it from a place of trust. And one of the things I'd say we fall back on, and I'll speak to Amgen, our mission is to serve patients. Like that's what the company's mission is. And I can't think of a higher calling than to help improve the health of people around the world. And it's something that is very personal to me. And I've had people, my direct family members, that fortunately and unfortunately have had to use Amgen's products. Whether they're going through cancer, chemotherapy, or suffering, from some grievous illness, I've seen the impact that our medicines have had on my family members' lives. Truly life-saving. And so that's something where it goes right to the core of who you are and the people that get attracted to working at companies like this or in the ecosystem that we all work in. It comes from a place of trust. I'm there at the company, I'm trying to solve this problem so I can get a medicine to a patient. And when you know that level of trust is there amongst your team, then you can open it up and have that psychological safety, knowing people are trying to solve these challenging problems. People sometimes in emotions get in the way, but we're all trying to solve these problems to help advance a product to get to a patient and improve their life.
I like that because again, it's people-centered, and we talked about psychological safety, you talked about trust, support. So it's really people lifting people through that shared experience and that shared context. And another form of that would be mentorship. And mentorship is a very important component. I know it. I've had a mentor for the past 35 years, the same mentor that I very much appreciate, and I still go back to him to ask for advice, so I know how important that is. Maybe Marissa, you can share with our students, how can they seek out mentorship opportunities if these opportunities are not readily available through their employer, whether it's a small company or a large company? Some employers have these programs, but some don't. So what advice do you give to our students to reach out and access mentorship?
Yeah, I had experiences with formal mentorship opportunities, especially before. So to me, what has worked is, saying, hey, Mohammed, I have no idea what you do. I'm super curious. Can you spend an hour teaching me what is it that you do, how decisions are made, and kind of building that relationship. Because at the end of the day, you want mentors to know you, who you are, and what you want. It's really hard. I used to say, my folks would come to me and said, I'm just trying to figure out what to do next. What do you think I should do next? Right? So, in other words, leverage the mentors to actually help you find the direction that you're interested in. It's highly unlikely that you know exactly where you're going, but you have an inkling on what drives your passion, what is interesting to you. And those mentors have to be a combination of formal and informal, but most of your mentors should be your personal, advisory board or board of directors, where you can go to different people and say, okay, so I need your help, I need your guidance, I need you to tell me when I'm completely missing the point. And so, to me at least, I build mentors by really building first that relationship, and then be curious, and then they became my mentors by de facto, because once they get to know you and who you are and what you like, people want to help. People do want, believe it or not, people want to help the younger generation and so on and so forth. But it's hard if the younger generation goes, well, I should be promoted. Okay, well then let's talk about it, right? Or you have to really understand what you need to work on and be open to the feedback that mentor. Feedback is a blessing, it's a gift. I always said my first performance review in the US at Amgen was, Marisa, you're great, your clients love you, but you have issues. And I go, well, don't we all? So, you speak with your arms and with your hands, and you open your mouth and you raise your voice, and you intimidate. You're too assertive, too Latin, too assertive. Right? Now, you can take that personally, or you can say, all right, so what is it that will make me more effective? And then have the person that actually gave you the feedback going, all right, so I'm going to tell you, every time you go in a meeting and you put your head like this, I know you're thinking, right? But if somebody's presenting, that's not going to be interpreted as you're thinking. Then those are the ones that you want. Those people are the ones that you want in your camp. The ones that are going to tell you what it takes to be successful. Right? Not what you want to hear. And you find it by just, God forbid, talking to people. We don't talk anymore, so we go right? No, that's not how you build. I mean, still in corporate America is really how you talk to people and who you talk to.
Very sage advice. We're going to open the floor for questions, so be ready with your questions. So you will have time as we ask one last question from my material here. Stephen, I really want to take the opportunity of you being one of the original architects of KGI. And if you have advice for the institution, whether it is us as an institution or the faculty we have, how can we continue or grow our role in expanding access and affordability of healthcare and medicine as an institution focused on healthcare and medicine?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that the wonderful thing about KGI and the unique element is that you have the bioscience, the masters in all the bioscience programs, the technology focused around that. You have pharmaceutical sciences, right? The study around that, and PA, right? The implementation of these these PA programs and access, right? Because even I, who work within the healthcare field and have numerous, trials all over the place and sponsored and, worked with lots of different doctors, have access issues, right? It's like, how do you access the care that you need? And I'm all about kind of the change in the delivery of healthcare as well as all these technological solutions, because without that, where will we be, right? It's going to end up going nowhere. And what we have today is remarkable, because the amount of diagnostics that are available to be able to read out on particular conditions, right? You need to know the family history, you need to know that base, you need to know what your biochemical readouts are and the associated pathologies with that, right? And then the intervention, right? What is that intervention going to be? And touching on a technology point just for a bit. So I was very fortunate to have worked within Al-Man Institutes when this small little thing called a glucose sensor meter was being developed, right? And this idea around glucose oxidase and putting an implant or implanting this in the subcutaneous space to be able to measure the presence of glucose in the blood or in interstitial space or in the serum or wherever it may be. And it's remarkable, right? Because we now have all of these ways to follow and analyze these things. And I'm a student of this. I absolutely love it, right? I know my genome's been sequenced multiple times. I know all the histories and all these other things and what the readouts are. And AI is going to come into play, and you're going to have, because the doctors, the specialists, if you can access one, right, in cardiovascular, it doesn't really study exactly what the internal medicine does or the pulmonologist does or the oncologist or all these other things, right? And you have all these factors that kind of come into play where you can treat the diseases before they happen. We have thousands upon thousands of drugs that have been developed over the time from, if you want to take the 40s or the 20s, as a time when pharmacy and when the implementation of modern medicine started taking place. And you can intersect at those pathways and modulate your behaviors and your activities and your intakes to be able to change those different elements. And you have this interwoven element, to be able to gather that understanding here. You have classmates that hopefully they do interact when you guys have the Friday get-togethers or whatever it may be to be able to really get each other's perspectives and see where the ball is actually moving in that regard.
This is very helpful, especially the last comment about the communication or the connection among the students. One of the initiatives that we're focusing on, and also part of actually our strategic plan, is the interdisciplinary collaboration. Because in real life, it's not just one discipline that solves a problem. It's really the communication and the connection and the sum of all areas. So that's really very helpful. I want to make sure that we're cognizant of time. So this is the time where you can ask a question. So if you want to be brave and come up, and we're going to use one of these microphones so we can float it.
Hello, good afternoon. This is afternoon. Hi, my name is Ijoma Chigezia. I am a first-year PharmD student here at KGI, and I'm also an alumni from KGI as well, from the Masters in Applied Life Sciences program. I have been involved in a couple of different leadership positions here, been able to work with President Abousalem in student government, both as professional development chair and cross-cultural chair. I am curious though, maybe you guys can look back into when you guys were in our positions, especially you, Marissa, who is also a PharmD, maybe think about what skills or maybe what traits, characteristics that you didn't recognize it then, but you recognize now made you to be an effective leader who you are today.
It's been a long time. We were still iPadding like well, I think self-confidence has always been, especially when you're dealing with doctors. Right? So as a PharmD, one of the things that will tick me off to no end is when I knew that a prescription that a patient brought me, it was wrong for that patient, and I will have to call the doctor, and the doctor will say, you have no idea what you're talking about. Right? It will always irk me. So I think that assertiveness of knowing what you know, and so that certainly applies to corporate or to any space that we go after. The second one is understanding not only the science, but also the business, because at the end of the day, I went into the business of science, and I think that was very important. And it doesn't matter whether you work in finance or you work in translational medicine. Today, you deal with business issues as a scientist every single day. And the third one that I would say is, I think you have to become very comfortable with ambiguity. Our industry, today's decision, you will probably not be around when the decision comes through, right? It's just so long, the timelines. I think all of that has caused us to rely on group thinking, right, to make decisions. But I think that's changing quite significantly with the advent of AI, right? So decisions, the information can be accessed very quickly. So now what happens is the decisions are more visible, right? And the accountability is more visible. So if I were to say what's one of the things that I liked back then is just give me the authority to make the decisions that I should make, which is exactly what I was hoping to do. And I think for PharmDs today, having AI would put really the responsibility where it belongs, meaning you have access to information. So you're not competing on, well, I know a lot more about drug-to-food or drug-to-drug interaction. I know more than anybody else. That was back then. Today, you can't compete with knowledge, right? But what you can compete on is the judgment. And at the end of the day, the judgment will be on that person that should have the final say, but the consequences are riskier. So we need to step up to the plate for all you PharmD out there.
Very well said. Other comments on the question?
Maybe just two quick words or a couple quick words. So working in teams, I would say, is absolutely essential. And looking back at KGI, the Team Masters project is a great test case for how work gets done going forward. You can only go so far by yourself, especially in this healthcare industry. Being able to work in teams absolutely is essential.
So it's the humanistic, aspect of life. It's really a case for the continuing value of the humanities. Even when you're in the STEM field, you still need that access to those
Today more
traits
than
and
ever.
that
So
knowledge.
true.
Great. We have another question.
Hello, my name is Robert Krimian, and I'm a P1 PharmD student as well. I have a very large interest in industry, and one question that I have for you guys, as somebody who's been applying for internships every day, what is something that would help stand us out? What are some good traits that future employers look for? What do you think is the most important thing to focus on?
Very good question.
Go ahead.
It's hard to say like just one thing. And if you asked me this question, say 3 or 4 years ago, I'd say, all right, you need to get your keywords in because they're going to get filtered out by the keyword search. Now AI has sort of blown all that type of stuff up, where for every internship or job rec that's open, there's literally thousands and thousands of submissions. And it used to be easier if you knew your keywords, you can get to the top of the list. Things have evolved quite rapidly, and so nothing beats knowing somebody or having a connection, networking, mentoring, that we were talking about here. That part of it is absolutely critical. The other part I'd say is, don't get discouraged if your dream internship job right out of the bat isn't something you land. I mean, I think you just saw from our careers, like we've moved around, considerably. And so as you go through each successive role, learn what you like to do, where you can excel, where you need to grow, and probably even more importantly, where don't you want to focus. That will help set up and narrow down some of the options, because over the next decades, 3, 4, 5 decades of your career, our ecosystem is going to change dramatically, but your options are going to increase exponentially. So knowing what you like to do and not do is just as important.
I cannot emphasize enough what Mark just said. We need to drop this and go back to this, the 40s and the 30s and the 60s when we communicate with each other. You will be surprised as to how few students know how to communicate in very succinct ways what it is they're after. And they ramble like blah, 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 blah. I think understanding what it is you need from us and using your network. You have a phenomenal network of folks that are interested in helping the students and helping the institutions. I think you have availability to the board of trustees because you're so small. And so, today, more often than not, you have to think about not only who do you know, but how do you convey what value you will bring if I hire you. What is the differentiator today? It's not computing, right? It's judgment. Well, okay, so how are you going to make me as a company or as a group better? What are the skill set that you will bring? Do you know enough about my group to actually bring me value right from the spot? I'm going to tell you a secret. So I was interviewing at Amgen during my first and second year of business school. And back then I was in marketing. And I applied marketing positions, nothing. And one day I have a message in the old answering machine and said, I'm such and such from Amgen Finance. It's like, finance? Now, I went to an accounting high school, so it wasn't too far-fetched. But, so we had I drove to Thousand Oaks, we had a great conversation, and I knew he was going to be at a UCLA gathering. And he asked me, he said, I'm doing a project where I have to benchmark R&D. I'm going, what about R&D are you benchmarking? I'm not sure. So I went back home, and I put a project structure together, right? That how I would approach the project. And when I saw him, I said, I don't know who's going to get the internship, but here's what I think. If I were in the internship, here's what I would do. So in case this is helpful to you, guess who got the internship? Right? So I think we need to think about how is it that you can use your understanding, your knowledge of the company, your knowledge of the person, the group, to bring value, right? Because otherwise, it's just you're one of thousands and thousands of questions.
That's very sage advice, and also it highlights the importance of having a network so you can have those opportunities to connect with the network in person. We're gonna try to take one last question, but before we do that, I'd like to ask Stephen, just on this question, with your experience working internationally, what kind of, how do you present yourself for opportunities, internationally, or what advice do you have for being successful in international engagements?
Oh, that's a great question. You see, because it depends upon which country you're in and which culture you're in, the way the business practices are done, right? It's very, very, very different, even amongst, if you take Asia, for instance, and if you're in, Taiwan versus, Hong Kong versus Seoul, Korea, it's just the way the way those interactions are, and the same within the Middle East, because I've been working a lot within the Middle East and within the Middle East countries, the differences there, and in Europe, the European nations are also very different. Whether how a deal is closed and how it begins and how that goes. And I think that it first starts with, your question of how you represent yourself, right? And what are your aims to this particular engagement, right? And if you're clear about that, and if you're open and honest and very direct, because being direct is an important component, but in U.S., just kind of like making a generalization, we tend to be maybe sometimes a little bit too direct or sometimes a little bit too assertive, kind of in that context. And a lot of it is based upon getting to know the individual, right? And the people that you've interacted with and your histories and all of the other things to bring a level of comfort in order to close, because some of those, the larger business transactions or those kind of engagements or partnerships or whatever it is, take a long time in order to do that, right? So you have to have a lot of cultural sensitivity, you have to have some patience, and you have to kind of be able to assess the situation as it goes, if that's helpful.
That's very helpful. Now, we're sensitive, we know there are classes starting at 1 o'clock, so some students may want to go, or faculty, but just one last question.
Bob's got a question.
Yeah, Bob?
Yeah, I want to address for all the students here, for when you get to that moment when you leave here and are going to that first job, and it's a topic that Marissa spoke to, and that is the one on mentorship. And when you go interview and you hopefully maybe you get 3 or 4 or 5 offers, the key, most important criteria is choosing the place to go where the individual who will be your immediate supervisor, has the capacity to be a good mentor and the interest of being a good mentor. That is one of the most critical attributes that you can use in picking that first job. And I know Mark's going, yeah, you talked with Gene and I about that a lot. So, but it is, I think, a real driving force that you need to consider as you go here out into the real world.
Yeah, and what I would say is, sometimes you don't know, right? So you know, one 45-minute interview, but the type of questions you ask during the interview, right, could tell you a lot about what is the dynamic of the company, right? So you can say, hey, how do you guys deal with, mistakes? So you can start building your repertoire of questions that will go at the core of culture, what gets valued and what does not get valued.
Well, clearly, we could spend the whole day having a conversation like this and enjoy it, but thank you so much. Please join me in thanking